God, allow this time to be a time of reflection and joy as we honor gifts that you placed in the body, the gifts you placed inside those gifts were in the body. Allow us to reflect on the way you use people, and you do wonderful work through us. I pray that this be an illuminating conversation, and a conversation that strengthens us in our work of justice. All these things we pray in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Well, let's do this. We've already introduced and let you know that this is tonight broadcast by the Community Congregational United Church of Christ. And so what I want to do now is offer an opportunity to get to know our participants a little bit better. We have two authors who are being showcased tonight, and those are Sophia Bracy Harris, as well as Brother Joseph Caver. Now, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with at least one of those authors, but just by way of introduction, I want to read just a little bit of their biographies so that we all know who we have with us tonight. And so I'll start with Sister Sophia Bracy Harris. She'll be the first one presenting. And just to give you a roadmap, the way things will go tonight is we'll have an introduction of each author. And then immediately thereafter, they will each, after they're introduced, have around 20 minutes to give a presentation to you. They'll sort of talk about their work, talk about what it means to them, maybe read an excerpt, and do anything they like to do to introduce you to the work. The purpose is to get us kind of our appetites wet for the work. We know that you might not have had a chance to read them. That's all right. We're going to be introduced tonight. And so this is what I want to do. I want to look at the bio first for Sophia Bracy Harris. Now, Sister Sophia Bracy Harris is described as a warrior for children by Equal Voice News. He has given more than 10, 20, 40 years, why can't I read? 40 years of distinguished service to the fight to improve the accessibility of child care for children of color and further leadership and economic development in marginalized communities by equipping and organizing them to advocate for themselves. Her work speaks for itself, and I could speak all night about what she's done, but I'll say this. Her experiences growing up in a rural Alabama community under the firm grip of Jim Crow, and later challenging that system and other external systems of inequality during her early years led her to help co-found the Federation of Child Care Centers of Alabama, which is also called FOCAL, in 1972. Harris went on to serve as executive director for 43 years before retiring in 2015. She did phenomenal things, including creating a network of more than 300 child care providers in Alabama. She steered FOCAL to achieve several key legislative wins, including a successful grassroots campaign to protect critical funding, which resulted in 28,000 families being retained on the Alabama Child Care Subsidy Program. She has done phenomenal things, and we want to not kind of use up all her time, so we'll let her speak for herself. Sister Bracy Harris, please share with us anything on your heart that you want us to know about your book and about your work tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Spella. And I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening. I'm very excited, have looked forward to this for quite a while. I'm also going to acknowledge that I'm wearing this mask, even though I'm in my own home. But my nephew at last minute was gracious enough to come over to help me with my tech problems. So I'm going to support him and myself by only removing it while I'm actually speaking, because I know that his family and as well as my own health are very important in our lives right at this moment. I'm happy to share with you a bit about my memoir, Finding My Own Way, A Journey to Wholeness Against the Odds. What is this memoir? It's the story of a young girl who grew up in a large family in rural Elmore County in the Jim Crow South during the 50s and 60s. What were the odds? The odds were illness. She was called a sickly child from rheumatic fever, poverty, racism, sexism, even sometimes regionalism based on what part of the country you might have been from, and most importantly, overcoming a lack of self-worth. Writing this story about my life was an opportunity for me to share my struggles, my fears, my joys and disappointments, in the hope that it's an opportunity for others to learn to never give up. Being a sickly child, I read books instead of playing outside with the other kids. But those were not stories about my childhood or families like mine. So I hope my book is an encouragement to others to write their stories. Join my journey, and I often call it shorthand, is for an audience of young people, adults, parents, teachers, Black, white, all races. At its core, it's the story of overcoming adversity, self-acceptance, and loving oneself and humankind. These are important points that I speak to in my book. I want young people to learn that regardless of your circumstance, faith, vision, determination, you can reach heights that you never, ever imagined. My hope is for adults, parents, family members, caregivers, teachers, neighbors, reading my journey, that you will come away with a stronger sense to know that words matter. Calling your children greedy, lazy, ugly, stupid, dumb are messages children internalize and wear, labels that define who they are to themselves. I think it's so important for children to be given opportunities to grow. I can share with you and share in my life the 3-year-old Easter speech. The 7th grade teacher having me to memorize a 3-page poem on the contributions that Black people made to America. That helped define for me that I had something to offer. And at the same time, it caused me to develop my first interest in what we contributed to this country as a people. I think there's also a role for goodwill, being willing to step outside the norm. Many things happened to my family when we stepped outside the norm. E.D. Nixon organizing the community to bring clothes and other things to my family when our home was firebombed. Rufus Lewis assisting with helping to get my sister Deborah back in school after she was expelled. The teachers from Dobie High who tutored us, even in the face that they could have been fired, but to make sure that we made it. Those things were courageous acts that taught me about courage. And so I hope that in my story, people will learn that it's important for us to have the courage to stand up for what is right. And again, I want to share a little bit about just so you get a feel of what is in my story. In chapter 9, it's titled A Sea of Angry Faces. In the sultry late August heat of 1965, as the first day of school loomed closer, I began to hear buzzing about those of us who were going to the white schools. We were leaving all of our teachers and our friends. I could feel my stomach tightening. Will I understand what the teachers are saying? Do I have the right clothes? Who will I talk to? Will I have friends? Will I be able to sing in the school choir? And the hardest question of all, will they hurt me or my family for enrolling at their school? Towns like Wetumpka though not far from Montgomery and its civil rights activities, were quiet on racial matters during 1965 through 1965, but these sleepy towns were quite capable of state-sanctioned violence in order to enforce segregation and the status quo on race. Deborah and I and other Black children integrating schools in Elmore County were challenging that status quo. And we had ample reason to be afraid. Miss Ethel Tillman, our neighbor, took her daughter, Annie Pearl, my mom, Deborah, and me on that first day. We traveled the dusty road 5 miles before the paved highway that took us into the town of Wetumpka and across the river bridge to the school. Mom and Miss Ethel made small talk about vegetables they had canned and the recent church revival. We three sat in the back seat, absorbed in our own thoughts. Nothing could have prepared us for the reception we received. When I saw the crowd of white people, I was shocked. I had been sheltered so far in life from this sort of racial rage. And despite the heat, I felt goosebumps. Wetumpka High was a red brick building. The concrete walkway leading to the school was crammed on both sides with a sea of angry white faces. Ironically, in the families of nearly all of these white people, Black women served as nursemaids and housekeepers. Many of these white kids played happily with Black children, but they were furious at the idea of our polluting their school. There was no way through, and there was no way but through. And they erupted into jeers, name calling, pointing and hissing. Some sported Confederate flags. Among the tormentors, I saw men, women, and children, small to tall, lanky to big-bellied, of every age group. I tried not to make eye contact, but couldn't ignore the slurs hurtle at me. "We don't want you at our school, nigga. Go back where you came from, nigga. Beware, a coon is passing. Niggas, you don't belong here. Go back to your nigger school. Leave out of here or you'll be sorry." I could barely breathe. I had no way of knowing that in the days to come, the insults, spitballs, paper wads, and slingshots would only escalate. Once inside the school building, I felt numb, but I tried to focus on what would come next. A tall man with a clipboard approached. He looked to be the one in charge. That is, if you could look in charge and scared at the same time. He led us into an office labeled principal. The next excerpt is chapter 12, the bombing. There was no sign of arson in the fire of the Bracy family home. Early in the evening of that New Year's Day, 1966, Deborah and I, several of our younger siblings, and a cousin had attended the annual Elmore County Emancipation Celebration, observing Lincoln's signing of the proclamation that freed Blacks from slavery. We joined the crowd, giving rapt attention to the Birmingham civil rights preacher, the Reverend Jesse Douglas. His message was powerful. His melodious voice rang out. I told Jesus that it would be all right if he changed my name. And for most of that sermon, he had us on our feet. The celebration had special meaning for me. I was in awe of the Reverend Douglas for reasons besides his voice and inspiring presence. He was also an albino with a strikingly beautiful wife who sat in the front pew, giving her husband her utmost attention. After seeing the Reverend Douglas and his wife, I realized the bias I had about Frank's pigmentation was no different than those students who ridiculed me at Wetumpka High. I resolved right then and there that I would accept Frank's invitation to start going together. We headed home from the Elmore County gathering full of excitement, eager to share our account of the experiences with Mom and Dad. We did, and then it was bedtime. Last I heard was Mom admonishing Deborah and cousin Joyce, stop that whispering and go to sleep. Less than 2 hours later at 1 a.m., I awoke to loud explosions, running footsteps, and shouting, screaming voices. Dazed, I stumbled into the dining room where I saw fire blazing. Groggy, I thought, I've got to find something to put this fire out. Somebody's going to be in trouble. Deborah yelled, Sophia, get out, get out. The house is on fire. Exploding flames blocked every exit but one. Dad yelled, Marie, get the children out, as he grabbed his shotgun and ran out the door to the cold night air after the lights of a disappearing car. As I burst outside, I saw Dad running, and I could hear Mom screaming each of our names and crying at the same time. Even as we answered her, she started over again, calling names to make doubly sure she had heard each of our voices. All 11 of us had made it out. The significance for me of documenting our history and creating opportunity for our youth is key to our understanding our country's decision-making structure and strategies used to keep people disempowered. There were many things I've learned about the Southern strategy and the deconstruction of civil rights. Many laws on the books that are designed to keep us in place. Not knowing our history causes us to think this is new. This is a first. We miss seeing or understanding patterns, strategies that are taking us back. I hope in my story, in my memoir, finding my own way, that you will also take away all of the guardian angels and the individuals who were willing to put their hands out and help us move forward to try to achieve that God-given right that we have. My story is also one of gratitude and acknowledgement of the many helping hands and kindnesses along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much, particularly for sharing those excerpts and allowing us to go into the scenes of your life. With a couple minutes that we have before the K-Rich presentation, I would love to just note the way you lay down on paper this blaring imagery that helps us to understand what it's like to be profoundly a child, have childlike thoughts and childlike concerns, and to be thrust in the midst of things that would warp adults' minds and would cause adults to lose hope and lose joy. Talk to us for just a few moments, if you will, about what it's like to be a child of movement, to be a child and placed in the concerns of the adult world.
Well, one of the examples that I want to share about a child's experience, and I talked about the 3-year-old and the 7th grader, but I didn't mention the 10th grader on her first day of school at Wetumpka High. The class was asked to do a composition on utopia. And I didn't know what utopia was. And it was only later that I realized that composition were called at our school a theme paper. And so she pointed me out and said, why are you not working on the assignment? Do you not understand it? And at this point, I understood what the composition was supposed to be, but I still didn't know utopia. And I said, no, I don't. And she said to me, the class was totally still. And you think you are fit to come to our school? At that moment, I felt shame and embarrassment and wanted to die because I felt I had let down all of my Black teachers, my parents, all of those people who had invested in my life. I felt like I had betrayed everyone because I had ridiculed my race by not knowing what utopia was. I carried that scar with me throughout my work. I see Wakessa on this, and Wakessa was one of the writers at Focal, and Jack Gilbo and all. And they would say to me, Sophia, you write well, but I didn't believe them. I still carried the scar that was there. I want you all to know that finding my own way, a journey to wholeness, has helped to remove that scar.
Powerful, powerful. Sometimes we heal ourselves along the way. Thank you so much for the ways that you have helped us to contextualize what it was to be in this position of helping to integrate your community. And for those who are not familiar, give us again the title of the forthcoming book and around when you believe it'll be published for those who want to run out and get it as soon as it's ready.
Well, it's a little longer than most titles, but it's Finding My Own Way, a journey to wholeness. And I stayed with it because I feel it's so absolutely important that we recognize, regardless of what policies are there, our inherent energy and need to make ourselves whole rests with us. And I hope that you all have a copy of it in your hands sometime in March.
Awesome. We're looking forward to it. We are very much looking forward to it. And what we'll do now is continue with our format. We're now going to shift gears just a bit. This is to whet your appetite for the books. We're now going to have a little bit of the bio of Brother Caver, and then we're going to have him to present as well, just a few of his thoughts as well as some excerpts. And then what we do at the end is we'll have a Q&A time. If there are questions you need answered, if there's more context you want to know about something, if you feel like you missed part of the conversation, you haven't. We're just whetting your appetite and kind of getting you ready for what's going to be coming forth. And so at this point, we're going to shift gears to Brother Caver, and I'm going to introduce him, present to some and introduce to others, Mr. Joseph Caver. Now, you may hear me continuously saying, and I just called it Brother Caver. That's because he's also a member of the Community Congregational Church. But Mr. Joseph D. Caver retired from the Air Force Historical Research Agency on 31 December 2011. He began in the Reference Division in 1981 and was promoted to the position of Chief of Circulations in 1992. His duties and responsibilities included providing professional research assistance with respect to over 100 million pages of historical records maintained at the AFHRA. Mr. Caver was employed as an archivist at the Alabama Department of Archives and History for 5 years, from 1976 to 81, and served as Chief of Civil Archives Division. There's so much I could say about Mr. Caver as well. His educational background consists of graduating from Otagoville High School in 1970. He has many degrees. He did his master's thesis, and it became what we're going to talk about tonight, from Marion to Montgomery, 1867 to 1887. And he's going to talk about that with us for just a few moments now. And so what I'm going to ask is, just as I said with Sister Bracy Harris, I'm not going to steal any more of his time. I'm going to invite him to talk, give you whatever he would like to give you from his work. And then again, you save up your questions and we'll be able to have a time of engagement with the authors after his presentation. Brother Caver, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Pastor Speller. So glad to be on with you guys tonight. I too am a native Alabamian, come from rural Otago County, next to Elmore County. So Sophia and I go way, way back, family-wise. We know each other. We're very good friends. I enjoyed her presentation and look forward to reading and purchasing and reading your book. But that's that. But guys, I don't know where to begin. I'll tell you this, I'm more archivist than historian. Randall Williams, my editor, said, no, Joe, you're a historian too. But I love to do research. And I was fortunate to become the first archivist, Black archivist for the state of Alabama when I graduated from Alabama State in 1974. So I spent my early years working as a division chief at the state of Alabama. And if you've ever been into the state archives, it's quite an intimidating building with all of the marble and the artifacts that they have there. But I learned how to be an archivist and how to manage and control and understand documents and large content of documents. And in 1981, I got a chance to become an intern at Maxwell Air Force Base. But I was in graduate school and I needed to write, Ashley's gonna get pepper, that's my dog, she liked a thesis to get promoted to GS9. And so a graduate student from Auburn University was telling me about Alabama State. She said they had it all wrong. They celebrated centennial in 1974, the year of my graduation, where in fact the school had been founded much earlier. And she took me upstairs and introduced me to the American Missionary Association papers. And I found the incorporation papers that the school was founded and organized on July 18th, 1867. A little memento there. The American Missionary Association was the missionary arm of the Congregational Church. So that gives you an idea about congregations, which if they go all the way back to the Amistad case, you've seen the movie, and they was anti-slavers during the antebellum period. During the Civil War, immediately afterward, they followed the Union Army throughout the South and established schools. And Alabama State is one of those schools that were established first by 9 Black men, former slaves, but aided by the American Missionary Association and America's first welfare organization, the Freedmen's Bureau. I thought you'd get a kick out of that. But so finding that surprised me. I got promoted, immersed myself in the vast amount of data in Maxwell Air Force Base on air power, all of the operational records of the Air Force predecessor, and even what went on yesterday. I worked in a vault for 30 years and with highly secure documents and information, and transitioned from paper to electronic records. So that's my 30 years with the Air Force. Near the end of my career, George Lucas approached us about doing a film on the Red Tails, and he had swindled the Tuskegee Airmen out of the corporate, the name for $50,000. That's still legendary. So we went to work with them, and my 2 other co-workers, Jerome Owens and Dan Halvin, and I got together and said, hey, since we're doing all this work, let's publish a book. So we published An Illustrated History of the Tuskegee Airmen, a good coffee table book. And these are the most authentic information on the Tuskegee Airmen out there. They come directly from primary source document. At that time, we also was working with the Park Service in Tuskegee with Molten Field. So I retired in 2011, thinking I could be an adjunct teacher. Randall William Collins, Joe, sent me a contract. He had read my thesis in 1982, which changed the founding date of Alabama State to 1867. He said, hey, this is publishable. Go to work. Well, I didn't want to go to work. Marion and I went to Alaska. We went to Jamaica. We cruised, and we were enjoying retirement. So the university celebration, centennial celebration came in 2017. I was in the middle of revising the thesis and updating it. But it took God's will, because all of the work in 2019 was finished. Then the pandemic uprised. But Randall Williams, the best editor in Alabama, guys, if you need an editor, Mona, Sophia, think of Randall Williams and New South Books, had an accident, fell through a building, was declared dead. This is in the middle of the pandemic. He's at Baptist Hospital, brain damage, all kinds of ailments, back. they had to induce him in a coma. He stayed in a coma for 3 weeks, but he got out in August. And in August, we went back to work and we produced this book. So that's the blessing from God, his intervention into this work to get this production out of and in time. And we've been getting good reviews. I see Felicia on there. She can tell you about the book. Guys, it's really the history of Black education in Alabama. That's it. But I go in depth into the 9 enslaved Black men that came out of the bondage and was figured out the only way for the former bondsman to advance would be education, just like it is today. It's no different. Education is the key to economic, social, cultural advancement. And they founded this school, and it was a private school aided by the American Missionary Association, their teachers. And they sent a young former Union officer, Thomas Stewart, to Marion. And I got lucky. Thomas Stewart, great-great-grandson, who is deceased now, had all of his records, his military records, his correspondence file. And I went to work. That's my chapter 1. But it's building this school. And in 1869, Lincoln Normal School became the first Black HBCU in the country, become a state-sponsored teacher training school. Now, you've heard of normal school. Normal schools is a concept that came out of Germany in the 1830s, or was adopted in America to tackle the pervasiveness of illiteracy. So after the Civil War, we see the establishment of Black normal schools to produce teachers. We had 500,000 former slaves emancipated in 1865. And education was one of the things they sought. And these 9 Black men came out and founded the school. So I'm trying to figure out what would lead these 9 Black men. Horace Mann Bond had written an article, Don Perry and I used to talk about this all the time, about this location in West Alabama, Marion, had the largest percentage of Black doctorates of any area in the country. And we couldn't figure it out. And Horace Mann Bond said it was the school. So Marion was the cultural, religious, economic center of Alabama during the antebellum period. The planters' wealth was achieved through the staple cotton and, of course, the importation of slaves, mainly from the Atlantic seaboard state. So they brought them into, and all of this wealth developed. And you had a large proportion of house servant versus field hand. Andrew Billingsley, a sociologist who was raised there in Marion, thought the difference was because many of these slaves worked in the home of the planters, and they learned how to read and write that way. But Charles Octavia Booth in 1895, Colored Baptist of Alabama, captures it. As you know about church and religion in the antebellum South, Blacks were allowed to attend church, but in segregated settings or seat-ins, but they adopted this religion and took it to great height. The development of Negro spirituals are a good example of this period that come out of that. But the zeal to read the Bible led to 5 of these 9 Black men being able to read and write at the end of the Civil War, before slavery had ended. Now, it was outlawed by the state in 1832 after the Nat Turner Rebellion. But these Blacks took it on themselves to learn how to read and write. And this is the beginning of the school. In 1874, it became the state normal school and university. The state lied. They did not fund the school. It was not up to the university level, but it was a normal school and produced many teachers that served, particularly the Alabama Black Belt and the Black population of Alabama. Now, this particular time, George Card, Thomas Stewart is ran out of Marion. He ends up in Nashville working for his mentor, and he works on Jubilee Hall, the Jubilee Singers, the fifth Jubilee Singers, Queen Victoria. Eventually, he go broke. He makes it back to Washington. His last project was on the Trump Tower Hotel in Washington, D.C., the post office building. This is Thomas C. Stewart. He's replaced by a man named George Card. Against the wishes of the Blacks in Marion, he stayed there from 1872 to 1878 when the Blacks run him out of Marion, and William Burns Patterson comes. Now here's another story, a Scottishman that comes to America in 1867. He tramps across America. He recognized white privilege. He builds a school in Greensboro called Tullibody Academy. And in 1878, he's chosen as the president of State Normal or Lincoln Normal School. And the school has become a zenith appeal for Blacks throughout the state in the South. It is excelling, getting all kinds of accolades. But something happened in 1887 that forced the school to relocate. Now, initially, everyone thought it was a fire that occurred between Howard cadets, that's Howard College, down Sanford University in Birmingham, and the students from Lincoln. One student pulled out his knife and cut another student and ran to Henrietta Curtis, one of the founders' daughter. She threw a revolver. This was a lot of action in the book, guys, if you want to read about all of this. But eventually, a petition was circulated to remove the school. Now, the petition was circulated because the local white Baptists wanted to retain Sanford or Howard College. The state Baptists wanted to move it out of Marion to a place that was better facilitated, and this led to Sanford being moved to Birmingham. Now, where would State Normal be located? Of course, many cities applied: Montgomery, Birmingham, Mobile, Atmore, Tuscaloosa, you name it. But it was down to between Montgomery and Birmingham. When the Baptists decided on Sanford going to Birmingham, State Normal came to Montgomery. Now, in the middle of all of this, Selma University, the Baptist school in Selma, is about to be moved, and it eventually resettles back in Selma. There's a lot of controversy going on about the movement. Another character you would really enjoy would be Jesse C. Dukes, a newspaper editor here in Montgomery called The Herald. He writes an article while all of this is going on about the movement, that the reason you're seeing Black men lynched in the street and bullet-ridden body in the street by the white police department is because the Black man had become cultured, and he called him the Black Romeo, the white Juliet, and just all hell broke loose with that. But finally, this led to the state Supreme Court ruling defunding the schools. For 3 years, the school is here in Montgomery without any funding. It was the Black community and the Black churches, First Congregation, Old Ship, Dexter, First Baptist, they pulled together to keep the school open for 3 years without state funding. And finally, in 1890, state funding was restored. But then we move into the big fight over the Morrell land grant designation. Many of you are familiar with land grant designation. First one was during the Civil War, 1862, I believe. Auburn University got the first land grant. But then in 1890, the second Morrell land grant, and each state in the South would establish a land grant institution for Blacks. I think Fort Valley got it in Georgia, South Carolina State in South Carolina, Florida A&M in Florida. But here in Alabama, the fight was between Tuskegee, Alabama A&M, and Alabama State. Okay, A&M wins the fight, but how? Bad blood developed behind it. It was rumored, according to Booker T. Washington, William Byrne Patterson race, he was a white Scottishman, was used to prevent Alabama State from getting the land grant designation. And this would lead to fights within the ASTA, the Alabama State Teachers Association, which is the predecessor before it merged with the Alabama Education Association in 1969. The fight goes on, but then eventually A&M become the land grant. Tuskegee become the second Black land grant. Alabama has 3 land grant universities: Auburn University, Alabama A&M, and Tuskegee Institute, which is a quasi-private experimental station. Tuskegee is based on the 1888 Hatch Act, but when Booker T. Washington hired George Washington Carver, this aided in Tuskegee securing their funding for this extension service that they provide. So now we get to the 1901 Constitution. Am I getting close, Pastor? Okay. Which legalized segregation, Jim Crowism in the state. Now, many of the founders of the original school were politicians, senators, and representatives, and was active politically during the Reconstruction period. But we had another constitution, 1875, which redeemed the state away from the radical Republicans, as they called them, to the Bourbon conservative. But by 1901, that was a threat of populists and Blacks joining forces and taking control of state government. And this led to the disenfranchisement of Blacks and working class whites. And this would not change until 1965, Voting Rights Act. And this is based on conversation with John Lewis, guys, that I'm saying this to you about. White returned in masses after the passage of the voting rights legislation. And hopefully we'll get a new John Lewis Civil Rights Act in this Congress. I'm hopeful and prayerful on that. But back to my story. Okay, so Jim Crow is legalized. But while the convention is taking place in the state capitol, the trolley boycott takes place. The Montgomery City Council had passed an ordinance mandating that seats on this streetcar had to be segregated. The pastor of First Baptist, A.J. Stokes, led the effort. They launched the boycott. It was successful. Eventually, the company stopped enforcing the segregation ordinance. Then in 1905, a company out of Lynchburg, Virginia, bought the company and made the streetcars start back reinforcing the 1900 ordinance. Blacks had no choice if they wanted to go downtown to the bustling Black business district, Monroe Street and Lawrence Street, go to the theaters or to Alabama State to work, school. The streetcars was the means of transportation. Well, Jim Crow won. And that audience that I mentioned to you was transferred to the buses in 1936. And we all know the story about the Montgomery bus boycott. That's the audience that was overturned in Browder versus Gale. I think that's the court case on that. So we go all the way up through, but something happens in 1907 in the Alabama legislature. We move into a progressive era. Secondary education institution are established. Parker High School was established in 1900. That was the first Black high school in Alabama. And then Tuscumbia High School in 1912. But before then, to achieve a secondary education, you had to go to State Normal or A&M or Tuskegee. Notice I didn't say a post-secondary education. They did not provide a post-secondary education until the 1920s. So they're called colleges, but they are really basically Black high schools. And of course, John Beverly succeeded William Burns Patterson, became the first Black president, and he started the Lab High School, the Laboratory of Learning. It was the first Black high school to be accredited by the state. I go all the way up to 1924, but in 1920, the school is granted its junior college status, and in 1927, 28, it is granted its four-year status, B upgrades, which is another controversial and long story. I'll be happy to take questions about him. Pastor, is it that time to shut up, or you want me to go ahead and wrap up? I'll open the floor for questions. But guys, the nurturing that these HBCUs, and particularly the one that I looked at, played a major role in the modern civil rights movement. It is Joanne Robinson and those students that started the Montgomery bus boycott. It could have been Rosa Parks getting arrested, but it was their work that got it going. And who knows, I'm the legendary lawyer, Fred Gray. I hope we get the street named after him. He is, his cases have touched the world, and it's unbelievable. But a 1951 graduate, and the state had to pay his tuition to go to Case Western and get his law degree because they wouldn't allow him to go to the University of Alabama. That's how Coretta also met Martin, because the state paid her out-of-state fee to go. These are little tidbits that I think I thought you would get a kick out. But the civil rights movement is birthed on these HBCU campus, and in the Black church. They are all co-joined together, and with them to the Black community. That's, you know, things have changed today, but in the, say, from my generation back, we were raised in the church. We went to our Black institution. We lived in our Black community. We took pride. The integration thing, and by the way, I was the first, my class was the first to attend an integrated school in Ottawa County. So that's a part of my history of my senior year in high school. And things have changed tremendously since then. But the role that these institutions play and continue to play, even today, you can't measure the value. William Burns Patterson, great granddaughter, Judith Patterson, talked about the Black middle class and the role that the institution played in building the Black middle class. Basically, and I also need to point out to you the role it played in the growth of Centennial Hill, that Black community that is very historic, very important place in our history. I'm gonna shut up and take questions. So feel free. I could talk all day.
Well, you're right. This is a perfect time for a Q&A, a perfect time to engage a little bit. So let's think about this. One of the things, just to start out the Q&A, and of course, is a time where if you have any kind of questions, observations, thoughts, feel free to share. You can type them in the chat if you desire to. You can unmute and start when there's an open moment. You can raise your hand if you know how to do that with the raise hand feature, whatever you want to do to be acknowledged. All right, I see Brother Patterson's ready. Good. So I let him start us up right after I ask this one. And I want you to weave it. This is to Brother Cable, but also to Sister Bracy Harris. Both of you are, as you're answering questions, maybe it'll just be kind of a thread in the answers. I hear so much about the importance of Black education, Black church, Black middle class, and I'm hoping you can weave into your answers maybe even some suggestions and some thoughts about how we can continue to carry that weight and to fulfill those roles in ways that maybe have been shirked in recent years. But to Brother Patterson, go ahead and start us off with the first round in the Q&A.
Okay, Brother Cable. After the land grant, how much independence did the schools have in terms of selecting presidents, board of trustees, and bringing forth a budget and things of that nature?
Well, Julius, the wizard, Booker T. Washington, in 1892, decided to pull Tuskegee out of the state system. It became a quasi-private, even though it received the federal funding through the state, from the state to Tuskegee. Now, A&M, the court case, if you read Knight versus State of Alabama, Auburn University was determined where the money went as far as extension service, agricultural service. Basically, the state controlled Alabama A&M and Alabama State. It wanted to control Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee, but it could not because of the philanthropist support that he had achieved. The land grant is, if you read into the book, some of the issues in the Alabama legislature, it's really highlighted. And him going to eat at dinner with Teddy Roosevelt at the White House, that was a no-no. White conservative wanted to close the school down because of that. But because of his independency, his school was only controlled by the state up to 1892. Alabama State and Alabama A&M still continues to be a state-supported school. And of course, one of the, and Pastor, I hate to go off on a tangent, one of the things I figured that ties in with this and this was in 1925, the War Department had said that Blacks could not achieve at a high rate. And so they could only do service position, but the Tuskegee Airmen proved it. Well, we're having the same discussion in 1866 in Marion and in Alabama, and in 1901, and in 1920, is the worthiness of educating our children. And I see my sister on there, Sophia, and what her and her husband is doing. I'm lost, but anyway, the white supremacy in Alabama, and that has existed since its founding and continues even today, played a major role in smothering the education of Blacks and prohibiting them from advancing, even though we did it internally, but the external factors are unbelievable, the obstacles that was put forth. But Julius knows the history of Tuskegee and Booker T. Washington, that action in 1892. And of course, this whole argument with Du Bois, industrial education, vocational education, liberal arts education, all of that is involved in that time period. But the Jim Crow legislature, that 1901 Constitution, put all of the power in the legislature. As you know, we can't change Jefferson Davis Avenue to Fred Gray Avenue because the legislature,
yes.
It doesn't matter about the municipality or location of it. It's home rule. It's a lack of home rule. Birmingham can't take down Confederate statutes because of the 1901 Constitution. But it is, and lucky for, in 1976, under the leadership of Dr. Reed, Alabama State achieved an independent board. Up until that point, it was controlled by the State Board of Education, all white Board of Education. And they decided what type of education and who would be educated in the state of Alabama when it came to Blacks and never. But the count out of that, Pastor, would be this Black church, our Black communities, the encouragement that Sophia talks about. I wrote down something she said about faith, vision, and determination. That's what the community, that structure, the church, the school, the fraternities, the sororities, you name it, that's what held our ancestors together and allowed us to advance to where we are today. I'll take the next question. I know, did I answer the question, Julius?
Wonderful. Did a wonderful job, and we want to open it up to yourself and to the Bracy Harris, of course, with this next question. First, let me see if there are any other hands. Are there any others who have a burning question at this moment? I don't want to miss anyone. Well, I'm thinking about, let me go to the second page of yours and make sure I'm not missing anyone. I'm thinking about the inescapable links. Who's that?
It's me. I had a question for Sister Sophia. Hi, can you hear me? Okay, hi, and thank you, Pastor Speller, for this. I got Sophia's invitation, and I saw there was going to be another author. I only learned a day later that we were brother. So if I have a chance, I'll have a one for him as well. And congratulations to both of you. I've known a little bit about your journeys. I remember first seeing Joseph's thesis on this many, many years ago. And Sophia, I've had a chance to work with you some there in Alabama and been a little up close with some of your journey. And my question for you, Sophia, is, do you have any plans to work with any of our young sisters, young women, Black women I'm talking about, who are struggling and have challenges like you described, as they're trying to find their own way, find their own voice, and get to some wholeness, as we are so much so encouraged to doubt ourselves, doubt our thinking, doubt our smarts, doubt our creativity, and our knowing what to do. Is that in the makings? And I know we got COVID going on. You may do some things online. I'd love to to support you in doing that. And Sophia, you're muted still. You're still muted.
Thanks, Sophia.
Yes.
The one group that I have retained membership as a board, besides supporting my church activities, has been the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative for Social and Economic Justice, and their Young Women's Leadership Institute is something that I'm very, very proud of the work that is happening with young girls between the age of 13 and 18 from the states of the Black Belt counties of Alabama and Georgia and the Delta of Mississippi. And each year at Tougaloo College, we have been bringing for the last 10, 12 years, 100 young women. This year was the first time it was a virtual one, but it was absolutely wonderful, even virtual. And it's a great opportunity for them to learn about their history. It's a great opportunity for them to develop leadership skills, to talk about health issues, to talk about their lives and what they want. And these women go back to their communities to create projects that they will work through during the year. And part of the reason that was the one that I kept, it was because I recognized that how significant, and you may, I know you recall being our first leader of the Black Women's Leadership and Economic Development Project at Focal, out of which Martha Hawkins, Martha's Place was born. So yes, it's still a very, very important need. And I'm sitting across from, as I said, my nephew who has been coming to meet with me because he wants to do the same thing for young Black males, because he worked in incarceration and he wants to stem the tide of those young people finding themselves in those circumstances.
Excellent. That's great, Sophia.
But I'm very limited. I gave everything I had plus, and now I'm still trying to patch me up to keep going the journey that needs to be gone. But I am so proud of the work that Institute has done, and you all were tremendous support to the Family Lore Project that was done, capturing the stories of our families, of our histories. That was a centerpiece of our family, the Bracy Brooks family reunion in 2019. So hats off to Aya for long life. You're doing fabulous work.
Oh, thank you, Sophia. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other questions? The floor is open. I see Michael Seltzer.
Yeah, I'm based in New York, and Sophia is one of my most beloved friends.
Hi,
Sophia,
Michael.
you've talked about the challenges that you faced. Could you comment on what keeps sustaining you in your work, in spite of all the barriers that you face throughout your life?
Michael, and you are indeed a wonderful friend. Folk, if you all don't know him, you need to figure out how to get to know him. He's a great friend. Michael, I say that the thing that gives me the kind of stamina to keep doing it is recognizing there is something to be said for having had some experiences that can absolutely be helpful, and not so much taking the lead, but being in a position to encourage. I find absolute great joy in the conversations I have with my 14-year-old granddaughter. And I learn from her, but also I marvel at how much she is interested in knowing some of the things that have happened. And I just think that it's so important that we continue to share our stories and guide in a way that our young people are able to see a path that that has been trawled, and that they can really continue. Michael, that's my and Jack Gilbo, who was deputy director at Focal for 25 plus years, said, Sophia, I don't want to rust out. I want to wear out, and I don't want to just get in a corner somewhere. And I just think that as long as there is something an insight that can be useful or helpful, that I need to find a way to continue to share that, because I gained so much from Miss Amanda Grayson in the 7th grade. I learned so much from Miss Thelma Bradford, all of those folk who gave me insights as a young person that caused me to have the courage, not to mention my Shiro, Fannie Lou Hamer, and all of these souls, and my mother, who have caused, many of us to really try to aspire to her giving. So thank you for the question. But as long as I'm here and there's breath, I want to try very hard to share what I've been given and recognize that it's not about leading. I am not interested in leading. I'm interested in offering support and offering what I have learned and what I've experienced when that is useful for young people to hear.
Beautifully said. Believe it or not, y'all, we are up on our time. I will ask this with the permission of our presenters. I would ask that we have a moment where we allow each of them to give, if they'd like to, a closing, couple of moments, just talking to us about any takeaway they would love us to have from their books. Now, for my note takers, folks are taking notes of the names and titles of the books so that you can go out and get them. We'll have Sister Bracy Harris speak a few moments about her journey, and particularly her book, which is entitled again, Finding My Own Way, A Journey to Wholeness Against the Odds. We want to make sure if you look at the chat, you'll see a way to be able to be in further relationship and conversation with her and with the process of the book coming forth. So share with us just a little bit out of your heart, Sister Bracy Harris, and then right after that, we'll have Brother Caver to do the same.
Well, I really, again, want to stress how important it is to capture our stories. And I think that there are many ways that those stories, they don't always have to just come in the form of a published book. I've been being sought after around my book now for about 8 or 9 months. But there's also that part of me that want my authentic story to be told and want it to be there. And I just think that that's such an important piece to be a part of our families and part of our community. And there's so much that we can learn that helps us to make connections to what we see in our world now. And I can't say enough about love. In 2009, I had been carrying this desire to write my story. I lost my soulmate, 2008, Albert Harris, and I was just telling stories, and I was out at a mentor ranch whose daughter is on this call. I know she sent a remark, but her mother was a part of the Family Aid Fund of the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, who provided funds for us as a family to eat and live for the 15 months that we were living in a hay shack, uprooted from our family. And she invited me to take my Austin Bannerman Fellowship there. And I met another mentor, a mentee of her mother's, Marty McCoward. And Marty says, you're telling all of these stories. What's keeping you from writing them down? And I wasn't in a place I could let go of focal at that point to concentrate. And she insisted. And I am so grateful that, as I said before, there's the goodwill and kindness of people that we all have inside of us, that if we are willing to open up and share it, we can help better our world. And I just believe the last chapter of my book speaks to the power of love. It's that second greatest commandment. And I just truly believe that if we take the time to offer a kindness and connect to another person as a human being, our world could be so much better right now. And that's the parting words that I would leave folks, because we're on this place and we're on this planet for a moment. And I'm grateful to have made connections with people who were so willing to offer themselves. I have to mention Jeannie Gratz and her husband, Robert, again, from this, who left us just a month or so ago. Again, it was having the courage to take a stand, to go outside of the norm, to be able to say, you matter because you are connected to me and as a human being.
Beautiful. Thank you for the gift of your words tonight. Profoundly biblical and profoundly powerful message. Brother Caver, we'd have you do the same. I see there's one question for you that you can ramp into yours, and it's very cogent. In the chat, it says, do you think the book will increase pride among alumni of ASU and increase support to the school? And you maybe want to put that into your closing conversation.
Well, we're hopeful. My publisher seemed to think the timing of the book is perfect. Black Lives Matter, the election, the emphasis on HBCUs again, Black institution. I don't have an idea about sales because of COVID, but I'm not getting any complaints from my publishers. But Alabama State has been supported. The president purchased 100 copies of the book, and of course he wrote the foreword. But my whole intention was just to tell the story. And in my family, my sister Sophia is on, and Sophia knows my family. Storytelling was common. Growing up, I think in my preface, I talk about my job on Saturday morning was to shave my grandfather's head. He was born in 1878, but after his second marriage, he decided he didn't want other people to know he was getting gray. So he was Kojak before it was possible. But he told me all about his childhood and growing up. And Sophia has some of the same stories and it stuck with us. And then my dad, my uncles, the family unit was so important. And that's something that we need to really refocus on again. Is not only the immediate family, but the extended family. And that's what we had growing up in independence and how it shaped me and my outlook on life and the encouragement to give back. When Sophia came to my dad about starting a daycare center at their church, this was a project that we openly participated in because we knew the goodness that would come out of this. And I remember this had to be in the 80s, 1980s, Sophia, 1990s, with your working focus in establishing childcare centers at churches and community centers. I'm off topic, but okay, back. But our legacy, our story needs to be documented. It may be audio, it might be whatever. The family law project that Sophia and Wakessa and Sophia is participating in. These are all worthy. These stories need to be maintained and circulated and disseminated to our youth. And maybe some of them will catch on. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
What a wonderful time we've had together. Thank you again to Sophia Bracy Harris, as well as to Joseph Caver for allowing your words to be shared with us. Again, From Montgomery to Marion is available right now through New South Books. And in just a moment, around March, we'll have access to Sophia Bracy Harris's book as well. And we'll be excited about being able to get that when the time comes. I pray that you were blessed and encouraged. I pray that something I was said tonight that strengthened you and that you will be able to go and find your own way, a plug for Sister Harris's book, and continue to go from where you are to where God is taking you in the vein of Brother Caver's book. I just want to remind you again, this is sponsored by the Community Congregational United Church of Christ. We'll be having monthly conversations around books. This first one is an author chat. Going forward, there'll be actual discussions of books once we've had a chance to read them. So every month, check back with us on the Facebook page to get more information. And I pray that you are blessed and encouraged and have a wonderful, wonderful night. If it's all right with everybody, let's close with a short word of prayer. God, we thank you for this time together and pray that we would allow this to be fruitful time for our spirits and minds. Allow everything we've heard to be retained and allow us to take from what we've heard tonight our marching orders to love, to serve, and to transform the world in your spirit. All this we pray in faith. Amen. Amen. And good night. God bless you. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to the next time we're together. Good to see you, Marty. I had to say it. I had to say it before it was over. So good to see you. God bless you all. Be encouraged.